The insult didn't arrive as a shout. It arrived as a whisper dressed like a compliment. "Graceful," Calder said, raising his glass at our friend's rooftop party in Santa Fe. "For 55, Sylvie, you're remarkably graceful." The laugh that followed wasn't loud. It was surgical. It cut along the seam he knew by heart. I felt the desert night press in, coyote song far off, lanterns wicking gold along terracotta. The Sangre de Cristo mountains glowed a last bruise of purple. I set my napkin down like a white flag I had no intention of honoring. Caldervoss had always been good at choosing the one word that could fold me in half. We were married for 22 years. He learned my fault lines and paved a driveway over each one. He got the Victorian on Canyon Road and the younger girlfriend with lacquered bangs. I got the houseplants, my mother's cast iron skillet, and the silence you split in two every night to sleep on both sides. "Remarkably graceful," I repeated, smiling. "Like a flamingo at a tax audit." A few heads turned. His new plus one, a lifestyle vlogger named Piper who looked like a curated sunrise, blinked at me through lash extensions long enough to pick up radio. Calder's mouth curled. He took a sip of mezcal he didn't like but pretended to. He was the kind of man who could be coached into anything if the room was watching. "What?" he said, voice warm enough for the crowd, cold enough for me. "It's a compliment, Sylvie. You should be flattered. Most women your age." Most women your age. He let it dangle, an unlit match near a dry field. I picked up my clutch. "I'm going to head out. Early morning." "Pilates?" he asked, innocent as a cobra. "Or cataract consult?" People laugh at things they're afraid to become. That's Calder's whole business model. Money and mockery. I told him once that aging isn't a decline, it's a reveal. He told me I sounded like a caption. I didn't slam the door on my way out. I let it close soft. It's more unnerving when the ghost is polite. The elevator opened on a quiet lobby that smelled like limes and floor wax. A woman my age, silver bob, black jumpsuit, stood reading a plaque about the building's adobe restoration. She looked at me the way women sometimes look at each other when a man has just said something small and you've grown a size anyway. I nodded. She nodded back. A ceremony of two. Outside, the desert air slipped under my shawl, cool and clean. My car dinged when I started it, an old Subaru that had earned the right to be trusted. I pulled onto Agua Fria and drove with the windows down, pinion smoke threading the breeze. At the light, my phone buzzed. A text from my daughter, Tessa, a junior attorney in Denver with a spine like rebar. "You okay?" "Piper's stories are already up. He's being Calder." I exhaled a laugh that wasn't a laugh. Piper's followers would eat it like candy. Women my age are side characters in that world. The cautionary tale, the before photo, the punchline. I parked outside my little adobe casita, the one with the crooked blue door and the yard that grows miracles after rain, and sat in the dark, hands still on the wheel. The night was a bowl. I could hear crickets. My heart slowed. Most women your age. It was a match. I lit it. Inside, I set my phone on the kitchen counter, flipped it to selfie mode and stared at my face. The deepening lines. The sun freckles from years styling food outdoors for glossy shoots. The eyes my mother gave me, Irish and stubborn. "Hi," I said to the camera, voice steady. "I'm Sylvie Hartwell. I'm 55. Tonight my ex-husband called me remarkably graceful for my age. The kind of phrase that smells like peonies and rot. Here's what I've learned. Aging is not a negotiation. It isn't something I apologize for or dress up to be acceptable. It's equity. I've paid into it. I own it." I kept talking. Not a rant. A ledger. 22 years of invisible labor. The clients I found for his boutique investment firm. The deals polished at midnight. The face I kept pleasant while he tried on futures I couldn't afford. And then the twist I hadn't rehearsed. The plan I'd been building in quiet. My pop-up supper club featuring women-owned farms. My grant application for a communal kitchen and mentorship program for second-act chefs. The pilot I'd been asked to consider by a streaming network that wanted real women, real stakes, no filters. I hit post. Not to go viral. To go visible. By the time I washed my face and fed the old cat who thinks he owns me, the video had 12,000 views. By midnight, 84,000. By morning, my inbox would carry 3 messages that would reroute my life like a river cut free. The subject line of the first one was impossible to misread. From Serena Pike, executive producer, Alder and Vine Studios. Subject: your voice. Our platform. Let's talk. Calder loved to say time wasn't kind. Time, it turns out, is extremely kind to the prepared. By sunrise, the high desert was already warm, the light spilling across my kitchen table in long gold stripes. My phone buzzed against the wood like it was trying to escape. The email from Serena Pike was still open on my laptop. Executive producer. Alder and Vine Studios. I'd watched their docuseries on female glassblowers in Portland last winter and cried into my tea like I was watching an old friend get her crown back. Sylvie, it read, your video hit me in the ribs. We're developing a limited series on reinvention after 50 stories of women who didn't just pivot, they detonated the whole map. I think you're one of them. Can we talk today? It wasn't the kind of email you overthink. I typed yes before my coffee was even done brewing. 2 hours later, I was in the corner booth of the Blue Coyote, the only cafe in Santa Fe where you can get green chili on a croissant without someone looking at you like you've committed treason. Serena slid in across from me, all black linen and silver bangles, the kind of woman who looks like she knows everyone worth knowing. I want you on camera, she said without preamble. Not just telling your story but living the next chapter of it in real time. We'll follow your supper club, the kitchen build-out, everything. I think people are ready to see a woman your age not apologizing for existing. I sipped my latte, tasting cinnamon and the edge of possibility. Why me? Because you look like someone who's already done the hard part, she said. The leaving. Now we get to watch you win. A laugh bubbled up before I could stop it. My ex-husband would choke on his imported truffle oil. That's the other thing, she said, leaning in. We don't have to name him. But the contrast? The man who underestimated you versus the life you build now? That's narrative gold. I could feel the shape of it forming. A story that was mine to tell without Calder's fingerprints on the frame. We shook on it over crumbs and coffee rings. She promised a contract by the end of the week. As she left, her phone was already at her ear, her stride like she was carrying news too good to keep still. Driving home, I passed Calder's office. Glass-fronted, sterile, the kind of place where the air smells like toner and suppressed panic. Piper's candy-colored SUV was parked out front. For half a second I pictured walking in telling him everything. Then I remembered, the best revenge is never announced. It's premiered. Back at my casita the inbox had grown fatter. A regional food magazine wanted to feature my first supper club. A farm co-op in Taos offered to partner. And from a sender I almost didn't recognize, Marina Lopez, a Michelin-starred chef I'd once assisted on a photo shoot, came a single line. If you're really doing this, I'm in. I stood in my little kitchen, the cat weaving around my legs, and felt it land. This wasn't a consolation prize for losing a marriage. This was the main act. Somewhere in Calder's world he'd see the clips, the articles, the buzz, and he'd tell himself it was luck, timing, a fluke. He'd never admit the truth, that he handed me the match. I just decided to light the whole damn sky. The first supper club sold out in 22 minutes. I posted the event on a Tuesday morning. 3 long farmhouse tables set under string lights in the courtyard of an old adobe inn, each course built from ingredients grown within 50 miles. I didn't think anyone outside my circle of friends and a few curious locals would notice. By noon my phone was vibrating like a trapped hornet. Half the names on the reservation list weren't even from New Mexico. Portland. Denver. One woman from Vermont wrote in the notes section, "Saw your video. Booked a flight." It hit me then, this wasn't just about food. It was about showing up somewhere you were told you no longer belonged, planting your elbows on the table and staying until dessert. The morning of the event, the courtyard smelled like roasting chiles and fresh lime zest. My crew was a patchwork of women who'd been told their dreams had expired. Delia, 62, who'd been a sous chef in Vegas until her male boss replaced her with younger energy. June, 57, who left a high-paying law firm to start beekeeping in Española. And Marina Lopez herself, her hair twisted up in a red scarf, working the grill like a general in her war tent. "You've got press tonight," Marina said without looking up from the steak she was searing. "Local?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She smirked. "The Times." "As in New York." "As in, please don't trip on your own brilliance." The words landed heavy and light all at once. Somewhere in the crowd tonight would be a journalist who could put our story in front of millions. At sunset the guests arrived. Gold light spilled over the adobe walls, catching on wine glasses and silverware. Conversations rose and fell like waves. I wove through the tables explaining dishes: blue corn tamales with huitlacoke cream, lamb slow braised in red chili and juniper. Every plate that left the kitchen felt like a declaration. Halfway through the main course I caught a glimpse of him. Calder. Standing just beyond the gate, not invited but too arrogant to think that mattered. Piper was on his arm, wearing a dress the color of a summer peach, her phone already angled for a perfect shot. He scanned the crowd like he owned it. Then his eyes landed on me. There was the flicker. That tiny shift when someone realizes the script they wrote for you is being performed in a different theater with a bigger audience. I didn't walk over. I didn't wave. I simply turned to the journalist beside me, told her the origin story of the supper club, and made sure she laughed loud enough for him to hear. By dessert, Calder was gone. Piper's Instagram later showed them eating takeout sushi in his sterile kitchen. But a message came into my phone before I even started cleanup. From Serena Pike. Call me first thing tomorrow. Alder and Vine wants to double the episode order. And Sylvie? Whatever you're doing, it's working. It was working. And Calder knew it. The morning after the supper club, Santa Fe felt smaller somehow. Not because I'd outgrown it, but because the horizon had just stretched. Serena's call came before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. They want 12 episodes, she said, her voice fizzing through the line. Not 6. You're not just a story anymore, you're a series. I stared at the beams in my kitchen ceiling. Old pine stained the color of roasted pecans. That's a lot of cameras, I said. It's also a lot of reach, she replied. And Sylvie, your ex is going to hate every minute of it. She wasn't wrong. By noon I had proof. A friend texted me a screenshot from a business blog. Voss Capital faces questions about sudden client departures. The article was short, speculative, but the subtext was clear. Calder's polished veneer had hairline cracks. And here's the thing about cracks. Once people notice them, they start pressing. 2 days later, the New York Times piece went live. The headline read, "The woman who made reinvention a 5-course meal." It wasn't just about the food. It was about legacy, visibility, and refusing to be erased. The writer called me a conductor of second chances, and quoted Marina calling my kitchen a democracy where age is an asset, not a liability. Calder's name wasn't mentioned once, which for a man like him, was its own kind of public execution. That afternoon I got a call from Tessa. "Mom," she said, "Dad's in damage control mode. He's calling old clients trying to figure out how you pulled all this off. He even asked me if you'd hired a PR firm." "Did you tell him the truth?" I asked. "Of course," she said. "I told him you just stopped waiting for permission." Filming for the series began the next morning. Serena's crew moved into my world like a quiet tide, setting up cameras in my kitchen, shadowing me at the farmer's market, capturing the hum of prep days when we worked until the moon was high. In between takes I kept getting messages from women, widowed, divorced, retired early, pushed out of jobs, who said they saw themselves in my story. But not all the messages were kind. An email with no sender name arrived one night. "Enjoy your 15 minutes, Sylvie. Some of us know the real you." I deleted it. But my hands were tight on the mouse. Because if there's one thing Calder was good at, it was making war look like weather. You don't see the storm until it's already here. I had no way of knowing that he was already setting his first real trap. And this time he wouldn't be content just to watch from the gate. It started as an invitation wrapped in civility. A cream-colored envelope slid through my mail slot one Friday morning. Heavy stock, embossed with the Voss Capital logo in gold. Inside, an invitation to the firm's annual philanthropy gala, black tie, benefiting youth entrepreneurship programs. It was exactly the kind of event Calder used to drag me to, rooms full of men who smelled like leather and power, women in dresses that cost more than my first car, champagne served with a side of subtle cruelty. Tessa called within an hour. "Mom, you got one too? He's fishing." "I know," I said. "But for what?" "Information. Gossip. A photo of you looking like you regret your entire life without him. Whatever makes him feel taller." For a moment I considered tossing the invitation straight into the recycling bin. But something in me hesitated. There's a certain power in showing up to the place where someone thinks you don't belong, on your terms. I sent my RSVP that afternoon. The night of the gala, I walked into the ballroom at the Eldorado Hotel wearing a tailored midnight blue suit, silk blouse, and the turquoise cuff my grandmother gave me when I turned 30. No sequins. No borrowed diamonds. Just sharp lines and the kind of presence you can't rent. Calder spotted me within minutes. He was stationed near the stage, Piper at his side in a dress that shimmered like poured champagne. His smile tightened the way it always did when he didn't control the scene. "Sylvie," he said, taking my hand as though the cameras scattered through the room were there solely for him. "You look unexpected." I let the pause stretch just long enough. "And you look exactly like I remember." He chuckled, low and rehearsed, then steered me toward a circle of donors. "Have you met?" "I'm sure they've read the Times article," I interrupted, turning to greet the group myself. One of them, a woman in her 40s with the confident eyes of someone who signs checks with more zeros than she says out loud, squeezed my hand. "We should talk about a collaboration," she whispered. Calder's jaw worked silently. Halfway through the evening, Serena appeared at my elbow with her ever-present notebook. "You're being filmed," she murmured. "Every interaction. Just be yourself." I was. Until Calder's turn at the microphone came. He launched into a speech about mentoring the next generation, weaving in lines that sounded suspiciously aimed at me, references to clinging to the past, to stories spun for sympathy. His gaze kept finding me in the crowd like a spotlight. The trap was clear now. He wanted to bait me into a public reaction, something he could twist into proof of my bitterness. But instead, when the applause came, I clapped like he'd just read a bedtime story to a room full of children. Controlled. By the end of the night, I'd secured 2 major investors for the Supper Club expansion and an on-camera endorsement from a James Beard Award winner. Calder left with exactly what he'd brought: Piper on his arm, a speech in his pocket, and a hollow victory only he could hear. What I didn't know was that his real move had already been set in motion. Quiet, legal, and designed to cut the legs out from under me when I least expected it. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, folded so precisely it could have been measured with a ruler. It was from Calder's attorneys. Not a lawsuit, not yet, but a formal notice of intellectual property concerns regarding the name of my supper club second course. The claim? That the concept, branding, and even menu evolved from creative discussions Calder and I had while we were still married, therefore making it joint marital property under New Mexico law. I read it twice, then a third time, my coffee cooling beside me. This was Calder at his most dangerous. Not the petty digs at parties, not the performative jabs, but the quiet, strategic strikes that looked legitimate on paper. The kind of move that forced you to fight on terrain he'd chosen. I called Tessa. "He's trying to trademark my life," I said. She didn't even swear, which scared me more than if she had. "Forward it to me. I'll get a second opinion before you respond." By noon, Marina was pacing my kitchen, her hands deep in the pockets of her chef's coat. "This is Smoke. He's hoping you'll burn money and time fighting him instead of growing your business." "Problem is, Smoke still stings your eyes," I said. Serena was less diplomatic. "Good. Let him try. We'll film every damn meeting with your lawyer. The audience will love watching you gut him in court." But I wasn't thinking about the audience. I was thinking about momentum, the kind you fight for in the beginning, the kind that can die quietly in a pile of legal paperwork. That night, I pulled out an old cedar box from the top of my closet. Inside were scraps from the years Calder and I shared a roof. Handwritten recipes, sketches of table layouts, budget notes. I sorted through them with a knot in my stomach until I found what I was looking for: my earliest notes on second course. The date was inked in the corner. 2 years before the divorce, 3 months before Calder even knew I'd bought a domain name for it. Proof. I snapped a photo and sent it to Tessa. Her reply came back fast: "He's going to regret this." The regret, I suspected, wouldn't come from losing the case. It would come from what we were about to uncover in the process. Because if Calder wanted to drag our shared history into the light, he might forget that some of it cast shadows he can't control. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in my attorney's office, watching Calder's legal strategy start to fray. He'd claimed second course as joint marital property, but in order to prove it, his lawyers had to produce evidence: emails, drafts, contracts. And that meant they had to open the vault. The vault, in this case, was his firm's internal server. By the third hour of our document review, my attorney, Claire Nguyen, leaned back in her chair and gave a low whistle. He really should have settled for dinner parties at home. Because in between the scattered references to my supper club were other files, financial spreadsheets with adjustments that didn't match client invoices, backdated documents, payments routed through a consulting company I'd never heard of. Claire, I said slowly, does that look criminal to you? She raised an eyebrow. Let's just say if I were him, I'd be more worried about the Department of Justice than a trademark. The best part? We hadn't even asked for these files. His team had produced them voluntarily, thinking they were proving ownership of my concept. When I got home that night, Serena was on my porch with 2 cups of tea and a grin that could light a city block. We need to talk about episode 8, she said. We've been following the supper club, the growth, the community. But now we've got a subplot. I didn't want to become a woman defined by the mess of her ex. But this wasn't just his mess anymore. What we'd found was what I thought it was. Other people, clients, investors were going to get hurt. 2 days later, the supper club hosted its 3rd sold-out event, this time in a converted greenhouse strung with hundreds of glass lanterns. It should have been my proudest night yet. But halfway through the main course, I spotted a man at the far end of the table. Not Calder. Worse. Gregory Stone. Investigative reporter. The one who'd taken down a real estate empire in Phoenix 5 years ago. When I stopped at his table, he didn't bother with small talk. I hear your ex-husband's building something that's not up to code, he said. And I don't mean in the kitchen. I smiled like I was serving him another glass of wine. Careful, I said. Some buildings collapse faster than others. And for the first time since Calder's letter arrived, I felt it, the shift. The story was no longer his to tell. It was mine, and it was about to blow wide open. The article dropped on a Sunday morning, the kind of slow news day when a scandal can eat the internet whole. Voss Capital under federal review for financial irregularities. Gregory Stone hadn't wasted a minute. He'd cross-referenced the documents Calder's lawyers had so helpfully provided with public filings, interviewed 3 former clients, and because he was thorough, pulled construction permits on every development Calder's firm had touched in the last 5 years. The headline was just the appetizer. The real feast was buried in the 4th paragraph. Multiple sources allege that Voss Capital knowingly misrepresented project budgets, diverted client funds, and concealed structural deficiencies in at least 2 commercial properties currently open to the public. By noon, the phones at Calder's office must have been ringing like church bells. By 2, the local news had camped outside his glass-fronted headquarters. Piper's carefully curated social feeds went silent. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. I'd learned that when Calder was cornered, he didn't surrender, he lashed out. Sure enough, the email came that night. Short. No greeting. No sign-off. I hope you're proud of yourself. You've destroyed more than just me. I stared at it for a long minute before hitting delete. The next supper club was scheduled for the following weekend, and every seat was already spoken for. Serena's crew wanted to capture the mood. Guests eating under strings of paper lanterns, glasses clinking, the soft hum of a cello in the corner. But now the event was carrying a new kind of energy. That night, just before dessert, I stepped up on the small platform we used as a stage. The cameras were rolling, but my eyes were on the people in front of me. Locals, travelers, women who'd flown across the country to be part of something that didn't ask them to be younger, quieter, smaller. Second course, I said, was never about revenge. It's about proving that a second chapter can be louder, brighter, and more honest than the first. And if that shakes a few old foundations, I let the pause work. Then maybe those foundations weren't built to last. They applauded like they meant it. Somewhere, Calder would hear about that line, and it would crawl under his skin the way his remarkably graceful had once crawled under mine. When the guests were gone and the lights were dimmed, Marina handed me her phone. On the screen was a news alert. Federal investigators have entered Voss Capital's offices with a search warrant. It was happening. The man who mocked my aging was about to find out that some things, like integrity, don't wrinkle, fade, or expire. They only sharpen with time. The footage from that night never made it into the series. Serena said it was too personal, too final. But I remember every frame. It was 3 days after the raid. The sun was low over Santa Fe, washing everything in that amber light that makes you forget winter's coming. I was in my kitchen prepping quince compote for the next event when there was a knock on my door. Not the polite tap of a neighbor. A hesitant, uneven knock. Like the person on the other side wasn't sure they wanted me to answer. I opened it to find Calder standing there. No suit, no tailored coat. Just jeans, a wrinkled shirt, and eyes that looked older than I'd ever seen them. "They've frozen my accounts," he said, voice thin. "The firm's finished. Piper left. Clients are suing." His gaze fell to the floor. "I didn't think it would end like this." I let the silence stretch. Once I would have filled it with comfort. Now I let him feel the weight of it. "You mocked me," I said evenly, "because you thought time had taken something from me. But look at you, Calder. Time just collected what you owed." He flinched but didn't argue. Instead he looked around my kitchen. The copper pots, the bunches of sage hanging to dry, the rows of invitations for our next supper club lined neatly on the counter. "You did all this," he said almost to himself. "Yes," I replied. "Without you." For a second I thought he might ask for help. But pride is a stubborn poison. He just nodded, muttered something that might have been good luck, and walked back to a car that wasn't his. Probably borrowed, probably temporary. I closed the door not with anger but with a strange calm. It wasn't triumph exactly. More like the moment you finally set down a heavy box you've been carrying for miles. That weekend, second course hit a new milestone. Our first waiting list for the season. The series wrapped with an episode filmed in a wildflower field outside Taos, where we served a sunset meal to 60 guests under a canopy of woven lights. When Serena asked how I wanted to end my on-camera story, I looked into the lens and said, "Reinvention isn't about proving anyone wrong. It's about proving yourself right. And sometimes, if you're lucky, the people who doubted you get a front row seat." Somewhere I hoped Calder was watching. Not so he could regret losing me, though I'm sure he did, but so he'd finally understand. The life he mocked was the one he never had the courage to build.